The Unnamed Light. Our next story is a chilling account from a group of friends on a hunting trip in the remote wilderness of northern Minnesota. Shared by one of them, a man named Brian, on a paranormal encounter forum. These men were experienced hunters, familiar with the deep woods and not easily spooked. They were rugged, self-sufficient, and had faced down many a wild animal and harsh storm. They had been on countless trips together, enduring harsh weather and long days, finding camaraderie in the solitude of the forest, confident in their ability to handle anything the wilderness threw at them. This trip was different. They had set up a base camp deep in the forest, several miles from the nearest logging road, accessible only by a rough, overgrown track. The first 2 days were uneventful, filled with the usual rituals of hunting, tracking, waiting, cleaning rifles, and sharing stories around the crackling campfire. The comforting scent of wood smoke filling the air. It was on the third night, a clear moonless night, the stars a brilliant, cold spray across the velvet black sky, that things took a turn. Brian was on watch, sitting by the dying embers of the campfire, sipping a mug of coffee, when he saw it. A light. Not a distant farmhouse, not a plane, and certainly not another campfire. This light was an unnatural, pulsing orange, about the size of a basketball, hovering silently above the tree line. He called out to his friend Mark, who was still awake in his tent, reading by the glow of the headlamp. Mark emerged, rubbing his eyes, and immediately saw the light. They watched it together, baffled, their hunter's instinct screaming that this was no animal, no natural phenomenon. It pulsed rhythmically, a slow, deliberate throb, like a giant, disembodied heart beating in the heart of the forest. It didn't move much, just hung there, a silent, unsettling beacon in the absolute darkness of the wilderness. "What the hell is that?" Mark whispered, his voice hushed with a mixture of awe and profound unease, his usual bravado replaced by a quiet dread. "No idea," Brian replied, his gaze fixed on the anomaly, a cold shiver running down his spine despite the warmth of the fire. "Never seen anything like it." They watched it for about 20 minutes, the silence broken only by the distant hoot of an owl and the faint crackle of the embers. Then, slowly, deliberately, the light began to descend, shrinking as it dipped below the tree line, until it vanished completely, leaving behind an even deeper, more oppressive darkness. The night returned, heavier now, as if the light had taken a piece of the night with it, leaving a void. They tried to rationalize it. Swamp gas, a distant fire, some kind of atmospheric phenomenon, even a drone, though none of them had ever seen one in such a remote area. But none of the explanations felt right. The light had been too distinct, too deliberate in its pulsing and its descent. They spent the rest of the night feeling uneasy, taking turns watching the spot where the light had disappeared. But it never reappeared. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by the image of that silent, pulsing orb. The next morning, the unease lingered, a palpable tension in the air. They decided to change their hunting strategy, avoiding the section of the woods where they had seen the light, opting for a different ridge. They tried to put it out of their minds, focusing on the hunt, on the familiar rituals of tracking and stalking. But that night, it returned. This time it was closer, much closer, maybe a quarter of a mile away. The same pulsing orange light, hovering above the trees, a silent, malevolent eye in the darkness, its glow more intense, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and stretch. This time, it didn't just descend. It began to move. Slowly, deliberately, with an unnerving, almost fluid grace, it started to glide through the tree line, moving towards their camp. It was silent, utterly silent, carving a path through the dense forest without a whisper of sound, without rustling a single leaf, without disturbing a single twig. It moved with an unnerving grace, as if it was merely floating through the air, completely unhindered by the thick undergrowth or the towering trees. A ghost of light. Brian and Mark woke the others, their whispers urgent, laced with fear. All four men watched in stunned, terrified silence as the light drew closer and closer, its rhythmic pulse casting an eerie, shifting glow on the surrounding trees, painting them in shades of orange and black. They could feel the heat radiating from it now, a subtle, unnatural warmth that permeated the cool night air, a warmth that felt less like fire and more like an internal pressure. The air itself grew thick, charged with an oppressive energy that made the hairs on their arms stand on end, a static electricity of dread. "Get the rifles," one of them, Dave, whispered, his voice barely audible, a desperate, futile suggestion. They grabbed their hunting rifles, the cold steel feeling strangely inadequate in their hands. But they all knew, instinctively, that a bullet wouldn't stop whatever this was. This wasn't an animal. This wasn't human. It was something entirely other, something beyond their comprehension, beyond their ability to fight. The light stopped about 100 yards from their camp, directly in front of them, just beyond the reach of their campfire's light. It hovered there, pulsing, perfectly still, like it was observing them. No, not observing. It felt like it was studying them, assessing, weighing. It felt like a deep, ancient intelligence emanating from that silent, pulsing orb, a presence that was both alien and profoundly aware. It was the most profound, unsettling feeling of being utterly powerless they had ever experienced. Then, from within the light, or perhaps from the darkness just beyond it, they heard it. A sound, not a voice, not a growl, but a low, vibrating hum. It was a sound that seemed to resonate not in their ears, but in their very chests. A deep, resonant frequency that made their teeth ache and their bones vibrate. A sound that seemed to bypass their auditory nerves and directly assault their nervous systems. It was a sound that filled them with an overwhelming dread, a primal fear that spoke of things ancient and hungry, things that existed outside the natural order. They couldn't move. They were frozen in terror, clutching their rifles uselessly, their eyes glued to the pulsating orange orb that hummed with a palpable, unsettling power. The light pulsed faster now, brighter, its orange glow intensifying to an almost blinding intensity, casting grotesque, dancing shadows across their faces, making them look like terrified masks. Suddenly, without warning, the light darted forward, a rapid, impossible surge, covering the distance in an instant, stopping mere feet from their campsite boundary. It was so close they could feel the pressure of its presence, the hum vibrating through the ground beneath them, through the very soles of their boots. It was almost as if it had breached an invisible barrier, stepping into their space, asserting its dominance. The air around it shimmered with an unseen energy. Then, as quickly as it had surged, it retreated, pulling back to its original position 100 yards away. It hovered there for another minute, pulsing, humming, its intensity unwavering, before slowly, deliberately, it began to ascend, rising above the tree line, shrinking as it went, until it was just a faint orange star against the inky blackness. And then it blinked out of existence, leaving behind an absolute, crushing darkness that felt heavier, colder than before. A void where the light had been. The four men stood there for a long time, trembling, gasping for breath, the terrifying hum still vibrating in their bones, a phantom echo of dread. They didn't speak. There was nothing to say. Their shared experience had transcended words. The next morning, they packed up their camp in a silent, frantic rush. They abandoned their hunt, their expensive gear, their plans. They just wanted to get out of those woods. They drove for hours, not stopping until they were far from that forest, back in the safety of civilization. The memory of that pulsating orange light and its terrifying hum burned into their minds, an indelible scar on their psyches. None of them have ever returned to those woods. Brian says that sometimes, late at night, he can still feel that hum vibrating in his chest, and he can still see that silent, unnamed light, watching, waiting, deep in the dark, silent forest. He learned that some things in the wilderness are not just unknown, they are unknowable, and they do not wish to be known, only to observe, to assess, to remind you of your insignificant place in their ancient world.